I just have a question for the chair.
Who's 60?
I just have a question.
No, questions are not in order. We're discussing a point of order.
I have a question on the point of order.
Then you're recognized.
If they're staff, why were they called consultants in their employment contract?
That's not a point of order.
Well, let me ask, Mr. Chairman, let me ask about this. Did the rule change last week, 1 week ago today, that we voted on, that you voted for, we voted against? Did it mention the word consultants in the rule changes that were adopted by the committee?
I can't hear what he's saying because you're talking.
Chairman, regular order.
Yes, I cannot hear what Mr. Jordan is saying because Mr. Collins is talking too.
The resolution that the majority adopted last week, was the word consultant mentioned in there when it came relative to the ability of staff to ask questions?
It was not.
It was not. So let me get this straight. You changed the rules last week, and now this week you're not going to follow the rules you changed.
We are all right. I am going to rule on the point of order.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak?
No, I'm going to rule on the point of order.
I'd like to speak toward the point of order.
It is not in order to have a debate on a point of order. The gentleman made his point of order.
They're not an employee of the committee, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman, you've made that point. That's your point of order. I am prepared to rule on it.
But may I be heard on a point of personal privilege?
Gentlelady.
Since my name has been invoked, I have ascertained that, in fact, the staff director for the House Administration Committee has not been solicited for his information.
Did not ask your staff director, ask ours.
Okay.
Fine.
Now,
Because you're at this point.
I yield back, Mr.
Because we
Chair.
go back. The issue here, though, is
the issue here was stated already by you. You don't have to repeat it.
no. This is be careful going down this road,
Made
Mr.
your
Chairman.
point, and I'm going to rule on it.
Be careful, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to be very careful.
The
Number
steamroller.
one, we are in an impeachment investigation, but that is whether or not we are is not relevant to this question. So we're not going to debate whether.
Yes, it is.
Now, it is not relevant to that question.
But now you just changed from investigation to inquiry. I mean, which is it?
That is not relevant to this question. The committee's retention of consultants is consistent with prior committee practice. Consultants have been retained to question witnesses at hearings and at other proceedings, not only in impeachment hearings. This is consistent with past practice. I so rule. I overrule the point of order.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary.
The point of order is overruled.
Parliamentary.
And unless someone wants to ask for a vote on the point of order,
Now, Mr. Chairman.
do you wish to ask? You wish
Yes.
to vote on?
No, I want to talk. I want to ask you a question here. Because
No, the
there's
point of order.
Regular order, Mr. Chairman.
The point of order. You raised the point of. You were recognized for the purpose of raising a point of question. You raised it. I ruled on it. Do you wish to appeal the ruling of the chair? Yes or no?
yes.
I move to table, Mr. Chairman.
What?
I move to table the appeal of the
This is a
ruling of the
sad
chair
day.
is over.
This is a sad day for
The
this.
ruling of the chair is appealed. The gentlelady moves to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair. The clerk will call the roll. The clerk will call the roll on the question of approving the motion to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair.
Can you get all that? Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren?
Yes.
Ms. Lofgren votes yes. Ms. Jackson Lee?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Aye. Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Bass? Mr. Richmond? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Cicilline? Aye. Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Aye. Mr. Liu votes aye. Mr. Raskin? Aye. Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Jayapal? Aye. Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Ms. Demings? Aye. Ms. Demings votes aye. Mr. Correa? Aye. Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath? Mr. Stanton? Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Mucarsel-Powell? Ms. Mucarsel-Powell votes aye. Ms. Escobar?
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Gomert? Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Ratcliffe? Ms. Roby? Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Ms. Lesko? Mr. Reschenthaler? Mr. Klein?
No.
Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Cohen votes aye.
Has everyone voted who wishes to vote? You okay? The clerk will report. No, wait. We're still waiting for someone.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
We're in the middle of the vote.
Oh, you're not having called the roll? Okay.
The gentleman from Arizona? Has the gentleman from Arizona been recorded?
Mr. Stanton, you voted aye.
Everyone, you waiting for anybody else yet? Okay, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 19 ayes and 8 noes.
The point of order, the motion to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair is agreed to. The majority has designated Barry Burke to conduct this questioning. Mr. Burke, you are now recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have a parliamentary inquiry before Mr. Burke begins.
I had one too.
The gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned earlier that there were consultants who had been used to question witnesses, and so I'm just going to ask as a parliamentary inquiry, what were the parliamentary occurrences where a consultant...
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. That's not a parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman is correct. That is not a parliamentary inquiry.
Very well, I have a point of order.
Who else has a parliamentary inquiry? Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Chairman, was today's witness, Mr. Lewandowski, when he was subpoenaed, was he notified that
That is not a
consultants would be
parliamentary
questioning him?
That is not a parliamentary inquiry either.
That's a procedural, important procedural question.
Mr. Burke
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Burke is recognized for 30 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn is in order and is not debatable. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
What? No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson-Lee? Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes no. Ms. Bass? Mr. Richmond? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Cicilline?
No.
Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes no. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Demings? Ms. Demings votes no. Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia?
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton?
No.
Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean?
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. McCarcel-Powell?
No.
Ms. McCarcel-Powell votes no. Ms. Escobar?
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Collins?
To adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Mr. Collins votes aye. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Gomert? Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Buck? Mr. Ratcliffe? Ms. Roby? Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes yes. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Ms. Lesko? Mr. Reschenthaler? Mr. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Gates, you are not recorded. Mr. Gates votes aye.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 8 ayes and 20 noes.
The motion to adjourn is not agreed to. Mr. Burke is recognized for 30 minutes.
First, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Who has a point of parliamentary inquiry? The gentleman will state his point of parliamentary.
My parliamentary
The gentleman
inquiry.
will state his point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My inquiry is this. It relates to the rule that we changed last week, where we mentioned staff would conduct questioning, and it's been expanded to include consultants today. My question is, did we contemplate that the distinction between independent contractors such as a
I'm
consultant,
sorry, I couldn't hear you. Did we contemplate what?
did we contemplate independent contractors such as a consultant would be vis-a-vis employees, which is what the staff would be, as being part of the distinction when that rule was changed last week?
The gentlelady from
Point of order, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Chairman, the advice I've received from the top staff person at the House Administration Committee is that staff can be comprised of employees, interns, detailees, fellows, contractors, etc. Staff and employee are not equivalent terms. And I yield back.
So would the gentlelady yield to a question?
Certainly.
So my question would be, is the Committee on House Administration indicated to me anyway that will not approve a contract if the services to be provided by the consultant are the regular and normal duties of committee staff? Are you saying that this, I mean, I was under the impression that this was not extraordinary.
That's not pertinent to this proceeding. I'd happy after the meeting to go through it, but this was signed off by the committee itself. It met all of our
the
requirements.
gentleman has not stated a parliamentary inquiry. Time is Mr. Burke's. The gentleman, Mr. Burke has 30 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, I'm counsel for Mr. Lewandowski. I need about 30 seconds to register a formal protest.
You are not a witness, and you should not be seated at that table.